welcome back to another episode of Digitalk Architects. Today with us we have Garret. Garret, welcome to the show. Please go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Garret Grajek, cyber guy. Focus is on identity and identity security and identity compliance. Been doing this a while, 25, 30 years. Was a programmer, was a sales engineer, then became a CTO and started my own companies in authentication, SSO, AI for identity, and now identity compliance.
Fantastic. Awesome. All right. Well, Garret, tell us a little bit about your experience. So you and I have talked and, through those conversations, you mentioned you've lived in Germany, Toronto, Calgary, Costa Rica, Chicago, and I believe now you're located in Los Angeles.
100% correct. Oh, and Singapore. Yes. There you go.
And Singapore. They missed that one. In Singapore.
That's all right.
So you've traveled quite a bit. You've done business all over the world. How have those different cultures shaped the way you build companies, lead teams, and approach technology? Because from country to country to even within the U.S., it changes from state to state. And you lived in Canada, and it also changes from province to province. So what does that look like for you?
No, I think it's a great question because it is something that I think about a lot when I'm on a call with someone, which is what persona, and to be blunt, what persona I take on for that call that relates to the person on the other side of the phone or Zoom or et cetera, right? Because the styles of communication are different. I grew up in Chicago and I have a Chicago personality. I could be extremely direct, which Chicagoans expect. Chicagoans expect you to be direct and to have an opinion. Now, the funny thing is, even in his own country, I'm in California, if you come on too strong with an opinion from the get-go, that's just not very SoCal. And that doesn't always come up good. It just doesn't. It's funny like that, okay? But I do respect the cyber community because universally we respect the SME, the subject matter expert. I know I do around our work. And so it's just a matter of how strong you come on as the SME. Is it more of a consultative, hey, we can work together, et cetera. That's what I find to work across cultures. Whereas, you come across as really strong SME and I know my stuff. Yeah, I might go into Chicago, New York cultures and that kind of stuff. But the other ones are like, this guy's too much. I can't work with that. So that's one thing I tend to rely on. I rely on the fact that we're in cyber. We're all trying to get something done. No one in cyber thinks they know everything. And so if we come across with a collaborative approach, that can help across. Now, one thing's been, all these cultures and stuff, it helps me identify which people I'm working with and which employees I'm working with are capable of adjusting their persona to the different cultures to be effective. And then I'd have, and that's, true use cases where I said, wow, we're working with this culture a lot and you always come across like this isn't going to work.
Right. Okay. So on that note of different cultures, I remember you mentioning that, for instance, Germans tend to over-engineer, over-process, while in North America, companies move faster and, they're more agile. How has that philosophy influenced the way you build your SaaS platform and how you've approached the product development?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to be a negative on any German engineering. I lived there, great. We did help a startup company there, so that was good. But I did have that experience in the larger firms there that were very, very, in my opinion, too over methodical for the SaaS space. how it has affected me here is I'm just meeting the expectations that the industry has for an American-based SaaS company, and they're pretty high. That we have to be in front of the curve. We have to be thought
Mhm.
leaders. That's why I write patents and get them approved, like I have in UATest. We have to be relevant. That's why I look at the CVEs, the critical vulnerabilities things, and I make sure our product is mapped to it. And I try to stay relevant with blogs that are pertinent to what's going on that day, and to webinars, what's going on that day. I think it is the expectation of a SaaS startup and an emerging company to be nimble and to be ahead of the curve. And we're leading on one section of the cyber experience and helping the industry with being SMEs and sharp on our platform. And I think it's not only a nice to have, I think it's required of a SaaS company, especially in the cyberspace, that we identify ourselves, and the investors call that a moat. Technical people say, you're just a thought leader, and this is what we're building, and we're ahead of it.
So tell us a little bit about what your SaaS company product is, because we're talking about developing products and how that's influencing, you're traveling around the world, it's influencing your decisions. Let's talk a little bit about the type of product, and then we can jump into some of that, the side of the conversation related to cybersecurity, and obviously we're going to talk about AI. But you have a company that specializes in cybersecurity. You've grown that company significantly, right?
Yeah, yeah. So what I have built now in a company is called UATest. You can go to uatest.com. It is you take the cyberspace, and then we go, okay, now I'm going to focus on what's called governance, risk, and compliance, which is the acknowledgement of rules and policies and actions that the cyber is doing. And now go a little more granular into the identity space. So that's what I've done. I go, okay, you only got so much capital, and how do you focus and build something differentiating and better than anything in the enterprise? Because I'm taking all my resources, all my brain power, and all my team's brain power and focusing on one item. Identity governance is the proof and attestation, and that's more of a legal term than it is a cyber term. Attestation means of who has access to your sensitive data. Who has access to your sensitive data? Can you right now show me a report, if you're in healthcare, who has access to your personal healthcare information? You're in finance. Can you right now show me who has access to PII, personal identifiable information? You're in defense company. This is their regulation for CMMC. Can you right now show me who has access to defense related information? It's called CUI, controlled unclassified information. That's the task of UATest. And if that means anything to you, what it means is that, yeah, Garrett, I understand, for healthcare, I got this PHI, and I have to meet HIPAA and high trust regulations, or I'm in banking, and I have to meet GLBA, NCUA, and some of the others around there, right? Okay. Those regulations spell out that if you're in these industries, you are responsible for the data, and you are responsible for keeping on hand that you regularly review who has access to that data. So that's what I built. I built a better, faster, and with AI product that helps with that task. It's extremely, of all the tasks that IT is still doing, that one is by far the most manual. By far, because what many companies are doing is they task some person. I just got off the phone with someone. They task some person, and they happen to be from South Africa, but it's all good. I mean, it's a worldwide problem of saying, okay, who has access to the data? Okay, Now, I want you to write an email to each one of those or communicate to each one and have them sign off that say they should have access to that data. And you're like, Garrett, is that doable? No, it's not in the larger companies. It's just unfathomable how much work that is, that a manager has to review and attest that everyone in this group should have access to that data. That's called a certification campaign. And it's required in everything. And for people who hold credit cards, it's PCI DSS. You're supposed to do it. So what I did is build a product and I interviewed a whole bunch of people in audit and in cyber, because that's the marriage of the product, is the cyber people are doing the work, they're handling the report to the GRC people. I interviewed people on both sides of the coin and built a better, faster product. And the biggest problem with the products out there is not that they don't work. I'm not going to be arrogant and insult products. There are actually a lot of very good products in the space. They just take too long for the small and medium companies to deploy. They don't have the resources or the system integrators to do it. So I built something that plugs into their existing infrastructure and I get people up and running in an hour. So that's it.
Wow,
It's an identity governance product for the small and medium businesses. And I mean medium all the way up to I got people doing 900,000 roles through this product. Okay. Um, is that they can deploy this thing in a rapid amount of time and start getting value out of it.
amazing. So I know this from our initial conversations, of course, but you went from advertising, right, into, and then you pivot into computer science, right?
Oh yeah, once upon a time at the wonderful University of Texas.
Very nice. And then, so okay, so first part to this question is, what did you learn from your advertising life that you are now applying to your SaaS company, and how has that helped you move your new product forward?
Here's the way I look at it. There is nothing more important to product building than than the real bigger word of marketing. A lot of people think marketing is just, putting something on LinkedIn or whatever. No, I mean marketing in a sense of what is your market? Do they really want what you're building? And how much will they pay for it? That's real marketing. Okay. And I and I
Yep.
and I and I think that is something is and it's I mean, every time you go to an investor or something like this in a conference, we in the cyber world get it. That's what we're being asked. But so all of that background has been helpful because I mean, and they did a good job in the things. That's what they told us, marketing was. Marketing was understanding who we're marketing to and what are their requirements. That's, the big trade off. And I just heard from someone in this community and he links guys like me up to investors and that type of stuff. And he goes, well, this particular investor didn't like product people. And he's like, it's his money. He's decide who he likes or doesn't like, And he basically said the product people are often too close, their nose is too close to the grindstone to understand what the market is and to have intelligent conversations, you know, where he, like ones that came, and this is his perspective and nothing wrong with that, came more with a sales background, you know? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
proud to say I've got both. I did the advertising in school. I did the obviously graduated CS degree, but I worked as a sales engineer and even a salesperson for large companies like IBM and Cisco. And what it did is help me understand not just, how to negotiate a deal. I think that we trivialize that. You can't negotiate a deal if your product is not even right for the customer. And
Right.
right means not only does it solve the problem, but things like, what I mentioned, installation time and initial cost of ownership, cost of support, FTE support for your product, all of that. And I do believe that's all about that's all about marketing.
Okay. So now we have the marketing and the computer science. How much of that blend has helped you as a founder in the cybersecurity and governance business?
I'm sorry,
The
what's the question?
blending, blending marketing with, technical, like the computer science,
Yeah.
but going into the cybersecurity and governance business, how is that helping you as a founder?
Well, it reminds me every day of what my real job is. My real job is to get this product into customers' hands. And if I ignore basic marketing principles of understanding who's going to buy it, what they're willing to pay for it, why they need it, and how I grow, I'm not doing my job as a CEO and a founder.
And you mentioned like your product is meant to get, especially the small, medium sized businesses, up and running relatively fast. So that's basically your target market, right? But a lot of these business owners of small, medium sized businesses, they think cybersecurity and governance are the same thing. And, for these people, can you help us break down what the difference is in practical terms
I think that's a
for
great
that audience?
because that is something that I have to explain to outsiders. I don't have to explain so much to companies. Like I just had a call that had the hands-on IT. I had the director who was the director of all departments. Then I had a guy who was in charge, tasked with risk and compliance. And he had two separate guys, which most companies that once they grow well do, and they have to divide off. They don't at the beginning. It's usually just a security guy doing both roles. But risk and compliance is more about the documentation of the implementation of cyber. And what I mean by that is cyber, we're focused on making things work. It's all good. All right, we have to make this app work, get available to these sales guys. Great. I need to get an SSO product that works on mobile and on desktop. Rock and roll. Got that running. Okay. PRC is saying, okay, you just opened up sales data, which falls under PII, personal identifiable information, to the outside. Great. You have to. It's a business environment. But the governance part of that is saying, all right, so do we quantify who we give it access to, or do we just open it up to everyone? And then secondly, what's the good governance way to do it? Should we do a regular review of who we've given access to? And that's actually by law, yes. And the other one is that, what is the access? Maybe we should have two-factor access. Maybe we should have limited access. So that's how cyber and governance work together. Because the governance person should understand not only the regulations, but the best practices. And it brings us to AI because there's not like strong regulations yet, but there's a lot of good materials by OWASP and NIST and ISO out there on what our best practices is.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit into the AI conversation because it's a pretty big topic nowadays. AI is changing so fast. How are companies managing systems, employees, and data access? And how do you see AI impacting governance, compliance, and the identity management
The way
over
the
the
good
next little bit?
companies that have their governance already set up, believe it or not, they're not as thrown by AI as the outside world would think they are. And the reason I say that is because they have quantified cyber in this way. And it's really all about identity. The CS, it's a U.S. organization, and the NSA, the CISA, CISA, and the NSA have got together with other countries around the world and just put out a document around agentic AI and governance. And it was all about identity. And it all basically said, hey, you got to know who's collected the data. You got to keep a record of that. You got to know who's training your data. You should keep a record of that. You should be able to quantify it. You got to know who is managing the algorithms and who has access to those algorithms. And you got to know who's retraining the data and retraining the algorithms. Okay, the companies that have strong SDLC, a software development lifecycle, and long history of good, what's called principal of least privilege, always knowing who has access to their systems, They took the AI development and just put it in their SDLC practices and then extended it and say, okay, we have to also quantify and be able to uh, uh, to say yes, that these users have to buy off. These are the only people who get to see the data. These are the manager in charge of it. He's in charge of who gets into it, and he's responsible for attesting to those. So the companies that already had very strong SDLC practices and procedures, not all of them do. Come on, we're all trying to run at the speed of light. Were really thrown by AI and are not ready for the regulations, and I certainly believe the lawsuits that will come around AI. It won't be the same way when software breaks. It won't be because you shipped software that broke. Okay, there is if there's some line in the marketing about it, yeah, but it's really more your practices were subpar to the standards of how software is being built today, how AI is being managed today, and there's no documentation that you are following these best practices. And this is not hypothetical. This was literally the suit that just happened to SolarWinds 2 years ago when they were part of the Colonial Pipeline takedown by the foreign adversaries who took them down going through SolarWinds, and then they looked at the documentation that SolarWinds provided the SEC in their 10Ks and 8Ks and said, hold it. You were saying you were practicing SDLC. You were practicing two-factor. You were practicing principal least privilege. There's no real evidence you were. That is going to be what's going on with AI. Let's say some AI causes a crash or causes blah, blah, blah. It's going to be, wow, you are stating that you are following these best practices. And so this is where I don't believe when people say, well, there's no regulations around AI. Yeah, there is. It's a cyber practice. Okay. You're under the same cyber practices, and then it's augmented with the new quantification of what cyber is in AI, and includes heavy controls, heavy identity controls on data training, and algorithms. So to me, the governance of AI is a superset of cyber. And the companies that are already practicing good governance on their cyber, I'm not saying there's no additional work. There's probably additional work because now you're doing data collection, data retraining, but it's quantifiable. But if your cyber practices in general and your SDLC, software development lifecycle practices, are subpar, you're going to be in a world of hurt.
I see. Aside from obviously how it's affecting companies in the cybersecurity and governance subject, you as a company, and as a SaaS provider, how are you guys using and how is that helping you build your team, build your product? How are you using AI within your business? Are you using AI within your business? What does that look like for a SaaS slash cybersecurity company?
Yeah, well, we are, and we're using it in many ways. First of all, in the background, of course, we're using AI. It's a great help in building software faster, quantifying software, testing software. It's
Hmm.
AI is great that way. You know, it's great for documentation, for making sure that all aspects are covered. Okay. It's great for even the marketing materials. We just wrote a guidance for a NIST 853 and NIST 171. New NIST comes out, map it to the new one. AI is really good. Okay, that's the back end. Now let's talk the product. Product itself, early on, we felt that one of the things that goes on, and this is something that is not solved and something I think UATest can really help the world, is enterprises around the world, hell, just America, around the world spend a lot of money on governance, a lot of regulations, especially around the EU,
Hmm.
the EU DORA now and GDPR, et cetera. Okay,
Oh yeah, it's
what
so big
about
and so
all that?
complicated.
Those are very intelligent people doing that work, very intelligent, doing really good work. Is the work that they are doing, is it being fed back into the cyber part of the company that in an actionable way? And I will challenge even the best companies and say, okay, great. Show me how. I mean, the average SOX audit, SOX, the American SOX audit for a
Mhm.
public company, is costing companies over $1 million. Okay. Show me how that's directly helping the guys, the bit twiddlers on the cybersecurity side. And the answer is probably not so much. And that's wrong. And that's a bad, bad practice. And what I did is in this product, when my background cyber and cybersecurity, I was like, why don't we come up with a score around governance that I can feed back into the cyber side? And all so my product basically goes through and says, all right, which users are overprivileged? And I got a whole bunch of quantifiable ways. If you do get a segregation of duty violations, you are. I have an AI model that looks at their permissions and says, "Wow, compared to all the other sales guy, this guy has access to these admin things. He's way out of whack." And then I have another one, which is when's the last time anyone has reviewed this, which is governance? That's part of what we asked my first question was, Garret, what do you do? Well, a product is a user access review product that goes through all your users and quantifies who has access, and then a manager says they should have access. So why is there not a identity trust score associated with that practice? And that's where I did machine learning and built a model, and now it's in the product. And so now not only is you're doing a user access review, you're ensuring that, but you have a trust score that says you can trust this user more than some of the other users because you've actually reviewed it recently. Or vice versa, you're letting this identity, be it human or NHI, exfiltrate a terabyte of data, and you haven't looked at this thing in a year and a half. That score of that user should be way low. And that's what I did with AI. I go, we'll take in a manual process, which is user access review, quantifying it with an identity trust score, and then passing it back to the cyber side of the house to say, hey, when you do authorization and access, use a score, use it intelligently. I was just working with someone yesterday. I said, yeah, because we can then do step up auth, or we can block the access, or we can notify someone of this. I go, that's everyone working together. And that's what we built.
Amazing. So you've built a product, you help medium and small and medium sized businesses. You're out there in in your opinion, from your perspective, what are some of the most common misconceptions businesses and business owners still have about cybersecurity, compliance, in AI?
Yeah, yeah. And so they should be cognitive that AI cybersecurity compliance starts with cybersecurity compliance. I mean, there's great documentations from this, and there's other ones as well that, and a much, lighter weight one like NIST CSF 2.0 and the others, but basically that say there are standard practices around cyber and cyber control, which are heavily around what do you call that? Identity controls. Okay. And I always lost it for a second, but there's, for the big companies, they should be following things like NIST CSF, which is Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, or Euros tend to file the ISO 2701. But smaller companies, there's lighter weight ones called CIS 18. And you take those, and that's your foundation for your enterprise's cybersecurity. Then take what you're doing around AI and map it to that. The whole, like, who owns the algorithm, who owns the data, who owns the retraining, who owns also, and it's relevant if you read the NIST AI RMF, who owns the policy? Who's owns the policy around your AI, including data collection, data retention, and data removal? Okay, and do you have a policy? And who owns it? And when's the last time it's been reviewed? So I would say that's it. It's a superset of whatever cyber security practices you have, and then with an eye on data and algorithms and policy.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. If you could give one piece of advice to a founder building technology companies today, especially in AI, in cybersecurity, and all that stuff, what would it be?
I would say figure out how you're going to get into most use cases and feedback on your product, right? If you come from a certain industry, great. That's your friends. Those are the people, those are your first customers and all that. If you don't come from the industry that you're developing the product for, figure out how you're going to get into that industry. I mean, you really like, I built something for real estate. Great. So what's your in on the real estate market? How are you going to get feedback from them? How are you going to get it in their hands? I built something for doctors. Great. How do you get into heart surgeons? And their feedback and their trials and their input and their modifications to your idea are what's going to make you successful. So that would be it. I mean, really figure out how you will integrate into your market and be able to obtain continuous input into your company. And that's how, from your first question, how you remain a subject matter expert, because you are taking in constant feedback from the community which your product is serving and building a better product.
Very good. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for coming out and spending this time with us and for being a guest in our show. It was great having you and learning from your experience in the SaaS business and obviously the cybersecurity and AI business.
Fantastic. Been great questions and all the best.
All right. Well, for everyone else, thank you so much for listening to another episode of our podcast. We'll look forward to the next one. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.